Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to Crypt Finder. My name is Brian, and this is kind of your one-stop shop for hidden classics and some forgotten gems here and there. I've been doing a whole series all about made-for-TV movies that have been pretty much largely forgotten by now, and a lot of them have been horror films because that's my favorite genre. However, the one tonight that I want to talk about is a little bit different. It's more of a fantasy romance with a dash of sort of supernatural shenanigans tossed in there. From 1978, the movie is The Bermuda Depths. Before we dive into the deep end of the ocean here with this particular made for TV movie, I just want to point out something. I've said it before, let me say it again. These films were made for network television. Ergo, limited budget, much slower pacing. So please don't go into any of these if you choose to watch them. Don't go in thinking that, you're going to expect the same sort of storytelling from movies that we have today. It was a different time. This is one of those rare films that really haunted an entire generation of children who happened to watch it back when it first aired on January 27th, 1978. Before the internet came out, you would sometimes hear people say, "Hey, do you remember this movie? It was about these two kids on the beach and there was a giant turtle or something." And somebody would be like, "Oh, yeah, I vaguely recall that, but I don't remember the name of it." And there have also been people on some different, online forums that have even had to admit, "I thought it was a dream or part of a dream." And I can completely understand that. I can't blame them for that at all because, yeah, there is a weird sort of half logic to this that definitely feels like a dream. If you were anywhere from the age of, let's say, 4 or 5 up to, early teens or so, you happen to be sitting home on a Friday night when this aired in 1978. I think the images from this movie, or perhaps a better word is the impressions of this movie, kind of seared themselves into your brain. At least they did for me. I watched it once in 1978 and I never forgot about it. And then I watched it again just before this episode, and I have to say, it's still just as confusing and endearing as ever. Why? I have no idea. It's not a good film. That's not to say it's a bad film. I don't mean that. I just mean that at times there's a sort of incomprehensible weirdness that's going on to this movie that makes it a little bit hard to fathom. I personally think it taps into so much of childhood that you ultimately just forgave all the illogical parts. And instead, it just resonated with the emotional experience, all the fears and the anxieties of being a child, especially a child in the 1970s. Yeah, it hits home here. There's the loss of a first love. There's loss of parents and home that's displayed. There's a loss of innocence. The sense that you were just sort of wandering aimlessly without purpose. All of that is sort of shoved to the forefront. And then the remainder of it is kind of part fantasy, part romance, part Jaws ripoff, part ghost story, kinda. It's a hodgepodge of fantasy, supernatural elements all crammed into one movie, and there's no concrete answers for any of it. So it's much more of a sensory experience, and perhaps that's why children felt so engaged with it and remember it so well. I'll try to hit the highlights of this plot and sort of have it kind of make sense, I hope. Okay, so the story follows a young man named Magnus. He's played by Leigh McCloskey. He's come back home to Bermuda, and his father was killed years before during a storm where his secret experiments on marine life resulted in some sort of earthquake or something from the depths of the sea, maybe brought down a lot of the house. It's a little unclear. Magnus reunites with his old friend Eric, who's completing his master's degree in marine biology, while also working for Dr. Paulus, who is played by Burl Ives. No, That's not a picture of Burl Ives there, but Ives did voice Sam the Snowman in the 1964 legendary Rankin Bass special, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And here he is again in another Rankin Bass production. I remember Burl Ives vividly in the 1970s. He did a whole slew of commercials for Louisiana Tea. But in case people are not aware of it, he was a pretty famous folk musician. He had his own radio show in the 1940s, and he introduced a lot of people to a lot of like very obscure folk music that was starting to fade out of the public consciousness, even at the time. Okay, so back to the plot of the movie. Magnus starts working for Paulus 2. Eric and Dr. Paulus are researching teratology. They're looking for specimens that have abnormalities. They've resulted in giant size growth, and they believe these creatures exist even today in the lower depths. But Magnus is also there. He's come home to really find out what happened to his father, and he's kind of haunted by this woman named Jenny Hanover, who's played by Connie Sellecca. Turns out she was his young friend, right? They played together on the beach when they were children. They saved a turtle egg which hatched and grew as they did. They sort of kept the turtle as a pet until Jenny and the turtle seemed to swim out to sea and just vanish one day. And now, years later, Magnus is reunited with Jenny, but she seems to be able to appear as a child. She can appear as an adult. She also seems to be the living embodiment of a woman from the 1700s who was on a vessel that started to go down, and she just began to make a deal with some watery god of the deep to save her and grant her eternal life. Unfortunately, along with this bargain, she's now become somewhat of a harbinger of disaster. The turtle that they had when they were young has now grown to massive proportions and seems linked to Ginny in some way, almost like a type of familiar. It's very unclear in the story if Magnus, his father's experiments, had anything to do with the size of this turtle, which has frankly become like almost Godzilla like proportions. And yes, as I'm saying this, it's pretty wacky saying it out loud, but the movie is somewhat better in terms of couching all this into some sort of framework that kind of sort of makes sense. What doesn't make sense? Yeah, you're going to have to fill in for yourself because this is not a script that wants to actually spoon feed you the information in neat little digestible bites. Leigh McCloskey and Connie Sellecca both, oh, they're so attractive. So, they don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the acting. It's pretty serviceable. The giant turtle and miniature effects are really dated here. The creature effects were handled by Tsugunobu Productions, and they were famous for the Ultraman series. This is one of a handful of live-action Rankin Bass movies that were produced. They were much more well-known for their stop-motion puppetry specials, like what I mentioned before, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but also a ton of other beloved classics, such as The Little Drummer Boy from 1968, Santa Claus is Coming to Town from 1970, The Year Without a Santa Claus from 1974, and on plenty. And as a channel featuring a lot of horror films, I would be deeply remiss if I did not mention their non-holiday themed Mad Monster Party from 1967. Jules Bass actually wrote the lyrics to the title song Jenny, much as he did writing the lyrics to another made-for-TV movie that I covered on this same channel called The Sins of Dorian Gray. This time around, Jenny is a haunting anthem to lost love the moment you hear it, and if you pay attention to the lyrics, not everything's going to be resolved in such a neat way. Everybody is not going to be okay. Carl Weathers co-stars here also, just a few years removed from his role as Apollo Creed in Rocky. I think if you go in with low expectations, or you saw it as a child and you want to get reacquainted with that giant turtle movie, okay, give it a watch. It's going to seem kind of cheesy now, but it's also a prime example of a time in filmmaking, even for TV, that you could experiment with blending genres and having conversations without quick cuts and fast-paced editing that causes your head to spin. So if you are up for a swim in some very unusual waters, I think that you should give The Bermuda Depths a try. Warner Brothers released a gorgeously remastered Blu-ray edition of this. Yes, the movie is somewhat sappy and sentimental, and yet it does have this overall melancholy vibe to it as well. But I love it. Anyway, I'll have some more gems for you in the coming week, so please hit the like and subscribe button and that bell icon just so you can be notified of any additional spooky finds. So as always, everybody, stay curious, stay away from those giant turtles, and stay scared.